Well, I'd like to welcome you to this memorial tribute to the spiritual conquerors of this vast continent, Mother and Father Dunn, on the occasion of this centenary year of the founding of the faith in Australia. Here, they are the pantheon. They are in the pantheon of the heroes and heroines of our early Western believers. John Henry Hyde Dunn in his mid-60s and Clara Mary Dunn in her early 50s decided to pioneer to the other side of the world with very little money, no job, and not in robust health. What daunting courage, what spirit of faith did they evince? And there is no better person in our community who can share with us her first-hand precious memories of Mother Dunn than Mariette Leong, who herself, together with her husband Ho-San, are distinguished and tireless workers in the faith. Who else has sat in Mother Dunn's lap as a child? Who else has shared many, many meals with her over the years? Who else today has a more personal knowledge of Mother Dunn than Mariette? So this is going to be an absolutely awe-inspiring 90 minutes tonight. Sit back, relax, and be enthralled. I present to you Mariette Leong.
Friends, welcome. It's my pleasure to talk to you all tonight about my personal recollections of Mother and of the life of both Mother and Father Dunn. You know, my father collected many stories and letters from friends over the years, and some of my information is gleaned from those, from that information. And my presentation tonight will start with explaining just very briefly the institution of the Hands of the Cause, because as you know, both Mother and Father became hands, and so I will explain to you how that occurred. And then after that, I will talk about Father Dunn, Hyde Dunn, how he became a Baha'i, and then Mother Dunn, and their meeting with Abdu'l-Baha, and then their pioneering days in Australia, and then my own personal stories of Mother as when I was growing up as a child. So I hope you've got a lovely cup of tea and a couple of bickies, and you can sit back and enjoy. Okay, here we go. So this is a lovely photograph of Hyde and Clara Dunn. So okay, so now we move into the presentation that I have on the Hands of the Cause. You know that Baha'u'llah appointed 4 Hands of the Cause, and these are the 4 that he appointed. And they're all very distinguished believers, led exceptional lives. And of course, we can read the stories of these hands in many of the Baha'i books that have been written. Then Abdu'l-Baha also mentioned 4 Hands of the Cause, and these served distinctively also through the years of Abdu'l-Baha's life and shortly after. You know, these early Hands of the Cause helped in the promotion of the faith and the propagation and protection, as we know. That was the twin duties of the Hands of the Cause. And they assisted very much in spreading the teachings, not only in Iran, but in India and Burma. And they protected the faith from the covenant breakers of all that was going on in the community, so that the Baha'is could know clearly and truthfully the Baha'i teachings. Abdu'l-Baha mentions the institution of the Hands of the Cause in his will and testament. And he says, Hands of the Cause are such blessed souls that the evidences of their sanctity and spirituality will be felt in the hearts of people. Their influence must be such that the souls may be carried away by their goodly character, their pure motives, their justice and fairness, that individuals may be enamored of their praiseworthy character and their virtuous attributes, and that people may turn their faces towards them for their qualities and resplendent signs. We will come to see later that the Dunns possessed these beautiful qualities, and that Abdu'l-Baha refers to in this quotation. After the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, the Friends thought that the Universal House of Justice would be elected. And even Shoghi Effendi thought that too. But it was when Shoghi Effendi was appointed, and then he thought about it, that he realised in order to have a House of Justice, the cause needed to be developed around the world. And Shoghi Effendi appointed 42 Hands of the Cause to help him with that task. Some of those Hands of the Cause were appointed posthumously, and Hyde Dunn was one of those. He was appointed April 26, 1952, a long time after he passed away, because he passed away in 1941. So Shoghi Effendi appointed 10. These were 4. Roy Wilhelm, Mustafa Rumi, another 4, 8, and then Martha Root and Haji Mirza Muhammad Taki. And of course, there are many, many stories. I won't go into that tonight because that's a whole new story. It was in 1951, which Shoghi Effendi called the Holy Year. No, I'm sorry, 52 was the Holy Year. But in December 51, Shoghi Effendi appointed the first contingent of hands that could assist him in the Holy Land. And these were some of those hands that remained in the Holy Land, and then also some in America and Europe. You know, his appointments just weren't random. They were all very strategic, as we know the beloved guardian was. He was a professional. I always called him the most professional CEO. He planned everything immaculately, and he appointed these hands very strategically around the world so that they could assist him. In 1952, he appointed the next contingent of hands, and this is when Clara Dunn was appointed in February 1952. And he sent her a cable which said, "Moved, convey glad tidings, your elevation, rank, hand, cause, stop. Appointment, officially announced, public message addressed all national assemblies, stop. May sacred function enable you enrich record services already rendered, Faith Baha'u'llah." Signed, Shoghi. You know, Mother was in Adelaide in South Australia. That's where I grew up at the time that she received this cable. And of course she was very happy, but she was also very humbled. And she said to one of the Baha'i friends at the time, "I did not ever expect this great honour, and I do not feel at all worthy of it. I guess, a natural reaction, isn't it, from those dear friends who were appointed. Next contingent was 5 hands, following as you know, many of the hands were getting old, and as they passed away, Shoghi Effendi appointed another hand in their place. So, for example, when William Maxwell passed away, Rahia Khanum was appointed. When Mr. Shockflocker was passed away, Jalal Kazay was appointed, and so on. And so these are those friends that were appointed in this situation, always keeping the number of hands to 19. Shoghi Effendi liked the number of 19. And then, of course, the last contingent of hands was in 1957. Again, strategically appointed Africa, British Isles, the Pacific and Arabian Peninsula. And of course, this is the time that my father was appointed in 1957. The beloved guardian said that Hyde and Clara Dunn opened the whole of Australia and New Zealand to the faith and raised up one of the pillars of the Universal House of Justice. Baha'u'llah's prophecy concerning the middle of the ocean was fulfilled through them. And you may have heard the prophecy which said, should they attempt to conceal his light on the continent, he will assuredly rear his head in the midmost heart of the ocean, and raising his voice proclaim, I am the life giver of the world. And so Shoghi Effendi told us that, and I got that actually from a story from Hand of the Cause, Mr. Kardem, that Shoghi Effendi had said that the Dunns had fulfilled that prophecy. Not only had they opened the faith to Australia, but through Australia, it opened up right throughout the Pacific area. Okay, so now we're going to move on. John Henry Hyde Dunn, a very handsome man, wasn't he? Very distinguished looking. Always wore a bow tie, always neat and tidy. He was born in England in 1855, the son of a consulting chemist. He was the youngest of 12 children. He became a salesman in England and France before immigrating to the United States with his wife Fanny. He was previously married with 2 children, but we don't know very much information about that marriage at this time. In 1907, at the age of 52, whilst he was traveling in Seattle, Washington in the United States, he happened to be passing a tinsmith shop, and he overheard someone sharing with the shop's owner Baha'u'llah's statement, let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country, let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. And Hyde Dunn said later that these words reached him with dynamic force, its truth and power crystallizing in his heart, his being magnetized by that one glorious utterance, and he found the salve for his hungry, searching heart. He visited a medical clinic in after that, he investigated the faith a little more and he became a Baha'i. And he was visiting a medical clinic in Walla Walla, Washington in Seattle. And he asked the nurse, who happened to be Clara, if she would put a notice on their notice board. And whilst he was doing that, he said, are you interested in spiritual things? And she said, well, I would be if I knew of any. And so He proceeded to share the faith with Clara, invited her to a meeting, and she soon became a Baha'i. Hyde was transformed with the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He gave up drinking, he gave up smoking, and he became a very active teacher. He became a very close friend of Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i, Louis singer, and they shared tablets of Abdu'l-Baha and attended study classes and public meetings. Thornton Chase said of Hyde's letters were a delight to him. His splendid faith and devotion without regard to consequences of circumstances. His patient bearing of the ordeals which so often accompany this vital cause. His sincerity, his devotion, combined with a level, saintly balance. In 1912, Hyde corresponded with Abdu'l-Baha and then had the bounty of meeting him in San Francisco. In fact, Hyde corresponded with Abdu'l-Baha many times and received replies and tablets from him. In 1916, Hyde's wife Fanny passed away. They had no children. In 1917, just about 18 months later, he married Clara. And the rest, of course, is history, and we will join that in a moment. But now I'm going to tell you about the story of Clara. She was born in England in 1869 with an English father and an Irish mother. She was the sixth child. The family moved to Canada when she was very small, and her father worked with the railways there. Her childhood was marred with poverty and a lot of domestic tension because the mother was an Irish Catholic and the father was a British Anglican, and so they had many disputes. And I guess that was one reason why when Hyde asked her that question, are you interested in spiritual things? She said, well, I would if I knew of any, because there hadn't been much love in her family when it came to religion. In 1855, Clara's married William Allen Davis, and they lived in Canada, and he worked for the railways too. But after 2 years of marriage, he was killed in a railway accident, leaving her with a tiny baby boy, Alan Davis. She took up nursing to look after herself and the child, but found it very, very difficult. And she had to give her child to her brother to take care of. And it was when she was 33 years of age that she moved to the United States, leaving her young boy with the brother. And it was in 1907, as I just said to you before, that Hyde Dunn visited her in the clinic. And she said when Hyde told her about the faith, she said, I'd never seen a man that looked just like him, that had something new in his face, a new light that I didn't know in any other human face I'd ever met. When he gave me the message and I asked, was it for everybody in the world, for every kind and colour, and he said yes, then that's when she was attracted and she went to her first meeting. She soon became a Baha'i, and for 5 years she tried to teach. She read the writings every day, but she was alone in Walla Walla, and she missed not having any Baha'i friends around her. The landlady where she was living, actually said she was going crazy. She obviously didn't approve of Clara's spiritual religious teachings. And in fact, she had a nervous breakdown at this time, and she spent some time in hospital. But luckily there was a lovely Baha'i lady, Mary Burland, in San Francisco, who invited Clara to go and stay with her. And she nursed her and she got Clara back to health. She then returned to Walla Walla and continued working. And then she heard that it wasn't easy also for her at that time. She didn't have a lot of money at that time. And then she heard that Abdu'l-Baha was coming to San Francisco. And of course she wanted to go. And she thought, how am I going to be able to afford to get to San Francisco? And she had met a friend who she had told about the faith, and she'd become a Baha'i. And this friend came to her one day and said, would you teach my father the faith? He was the mayor of a small county nearby. And so she invited him to her house, Mr. Bailey, for firesides, and he came. But then on the third occasion, very surprisingly, he proposed to her, which was an absolute shock. And she said to him, Mr. Bailey, I will never marry you, in a very stern voice. And she said, before she was a Baha'i, she would have said, get out of here. But she was trying very hard to be a Baha'i and practice her virtues. Now, I got that story from a videotape that my father had done of Clara when she was visiting us in 1954. He taped her on one of those old, oh, sorry, my throat, let me just have a sip of water. He taped her on one of those old videotape machines. And I remember, because I used to run in and out, and the lounge room door would squeak and my father would frown at me because he knew that the squeaking of the door would go into the video. But anyway, this is where she told the story of how she became a Baha'i, how she met Abdu'l-Baha, and then how she came to Australia. And so some of my information comes from this videotape. It happens to be in archives now, so. So yes, she told Mr. Bailey to get out. So when she wanted to go to San Francisco, she was thinking, who can I borrow some money from? So she thought of Mr. Bailey, and she thought, oh, I wonder if he will lend me some money. So she visited him. He was the mayor of a small county, and she thought maybe he's got a bit of spare money. So she went to his house and she knocked on the door, and the housekeeper said, what do you want? And she says, I'd like to visit Mr. Bailey. And she said, well, he's sick. And she said nothing was going to stop me from seeing Mr. Bailey. She pushed the door open and she said, where is he? And the lady said, well, he's upstairs, the first bedroom on the right. So she says, I just went up and I knocked on the door and I walked in. And she said, Mr. Bailey wasn't really sick. He had a headache and he was just lying on top of his bed. So she said to him, Mr. Bailey, would you lend me some money? I want to go to San Francisco to meet Abdu'l-Baha. He burst out laughing. She said, Mr. Bailey, this is no laughing matter. And he said, well, excuse me. My favourite woman who turned down my proposal in marriage, and then my daughter who telegrams me this morning asking, Father, please send me some money so I can see Abdu'l-Baha. And now you come and ask for money. And then he said, where's my checkbook? And of course he gave her some money. That night she was on the train to see Abdu'l-Baha. But she arrived, she was tired, absolutely exhausted from the long journey. And she goes to the house. She found the house. She got on the tram. She didn't know where it was. She got on the tram and she just asked the tram driver, have you heard of Abdu'l-Baha? Please take me to the house where he's meeting with lots of friends. And the driver said to her, oh yes, I know. I let off all the people from all funny places in the world come on this tram to visit him. So he told her where to go. And she got to the door and she rang the bell and nobody answered. She was so tired. She rang again. Nobody answered. Again and again. She got mad and she got madder and then she started to cry. And then she said, I pushed the door and it opened. She thought, oh, because she could see the people inside. She knew they were all there. So she walked in. And there was Abdu'l-Baha. She was ushered into his presence. He was with Ali Akbar, the interpreter. And he said, would you excuse me for not rising? She said, I knew it was Abdu'l-Baha's voice. Many times he spoke in English. And then he said, I'm very weary. So Mother said, I looked up and I said to Ali Akbar, if Abdu'l-Baha is weary, would you excuse me? Yes, yes, he said. Abdu'l-Baha went off upstairs and he rested for half an hour. He'd been talking with reporters from newspapers and so on, and he was very, very tired. And Clara said that when she looked at him, he looked all black and grey. And so she knew, she said, clairvoyantly, I saw him as black as ink and stooped over. But then in less than half an hour, he came jolting down the stairs, fully restored. And he invited me with a lovely smile to come and join for dinner. So she said she went to the dinner table and Abdu'l-Baha told a story about an old lady who took a duck to market, proclaiming her duck to be exceptionally large and wonderful. And as he told the story, he looked at Clara straight in the eyes all the while. And she realised that he was teaching her some lesson. When I tell a story, she thought, yeah, sometimes I exaggerate. If God will forgive me, I'll never do that again. After dinner, Hyde Dunn was there. And after dinner, he approached her and he apologised for not opening the door. He was actually on door duty, so she wasn't very happy with him at the time. Of course, many of you may have seen this photograph when Abdu'l-Baha was with the friends in the United States. And you know, both Clara and Hyde wrote to Abdu'l-Baha, and both of them received replies from him, tablets from him, and both of them met him. And both of them, of course, were very energized by his appearance, his talks, and the spirit that he conveyed of the faith. And it energized them even more. And then, of course, when the tablets of the divine plan came, they were encouraged to pioneer. But it was in 1917 that Clara and Hyde Dunn married after the passing of Fanny Dunn in 1915. In 1916, of course, Abdu'l-Baha wrote the tablets of the Divine Plan, but they weren't announced until the National Convention in New York in 1919. And then copies were sent to all the Baha'is in the United States. And at that time, the Dunns were on holiday in Santa Cruz, California, when they received the tablets. And Hyde told the story. He said, it was very simple, a wave that came into our lives, possessing us and satisfying every desire to serve our beloved cause, the cause of Baha'u'llah and his glorious covenant. Mother was reading Abdu'l-Baha's call to the United States and Canada, and his appeal was so penetrating and thrilling, it pierced our hearts. In one part he said, if I could only go in poverty and barefooted and raise the call to Ya Baha'u'llah, but that is not now possible. Mother looked up and said, shall we go, Father? Yes, was his reply, and no further discussion took place. We returned to San Francisco, and after a few months, my resignation to the firm was sent, everything given up and arrangements made for our prompt sailing. They had written to Abdu'l-Baha asking if he was happy for them to go to Australia, and of course he replied that he was very happy. And then they made arrangements and they left about 3 months later. Actually, Abdu'l-Baha says highly commendable. That was his cable reply. So off they went, arriving in Sydney, as we all know, on the 10th of April. Oh, and I've got 2020, 1920. That should be 1920. 2020, of course, is right now our 100th anniversary. I'll correct that later. In Hawaii, Hyde Dunn had purchased some brooches with butterflies in them, and he didn't declare them because he didn't know he had to. Immigration sent him to court. So obviously, Sydney Immigration Department was very strict in those days, as they are now. He hoped the judge would send him to prison so he'd know what Abdu'l-Baha went through, but instead, the judge took the last of their money. So they were virtually penniless. The first 2 years were very difficult. The first few nights, the first week or so was very difficult. The first few nights they stayed in a boarding house. And Clara said in a letter to one of her friends back in the United States when she wrote, she said that Sydney was a God-forsaken place. This is her first recollection. Filthy, a dirty city, poorly lit at night, and drinking by both men and women, whichever way you turn, and the people looked besotted and slow. Father and I said, well, where in the world could we have gone where they needed the beloved teachings more than here? And instead of being discouraged at the difficulties, we were so happy we were the ones to come here. And strange to say, the way has opened up many times for Hyde to talk to groups. The second day after their arrival, which was a Sunday, he spoke to 19 people in the boarding house where they were staying. And since then, he has spoken several times to many groups. So this is how they turned what they found as a disadvantage in the end into an advantage. They looked at the brighter side. They eventually found a nice flat in Sydney, but Hyde became sick. In fact, he wasn't well from the time he was on board ship. And my guess, this is my personal guess, is that he was really depressed. You know, back in the United States, he had tried to put in place plans to open a business in Sydney when he arrived. And for some reason, all those plans fell through. So he was obviously very, very worried as to how they were going to make money, how were they going to live. And I think it was all too much for him in the beginning. And so Clara worked, and she was very lucky. You see how Baha'u'llah works. To have met on board ship the manager of the Baha'i medical clinic, the same clinic that she worked for back in Walla Walla, Washington. They were opening a clinic in Sydney. And so he said that she was offered a job in that clinic. And so that's where she went. She went straight to that clinic and she worked there for about 6 months. And then Hyde came to her one day and said, "I'm much better. It's time for me to look for a job and give you a break." And that's what he did. He found a job with a company called Bacchus Marsh Milk Company. And soon afterwards, they became Nestle. In Australia, it's a very common milk product. I don't know about in the States and the rest of the world, but here in Australia, it's very well known. This is the Bacchus Marsh Milk Company back in those days. Within 2 years, Hyde had topped the sales figures for the company out of all the salesmen. And they called him in and they said to him, "What do you want?" And he said, "Make me manager, sales manager, so that I can travel around Australia." You see how Baha'u'llah works? So after that, he travelled to Western Australia, to Queensland, eastern states of Australia, down to Tasmania, all with the company, Nestle. And then, of course, as he travelled, he taught the faith wherever he went. In some places, Clara would accompany Hyde and set up home whilst he was away during the week, and he would come back on weekends and they would have firesides. She would arrange meetings with some of her friends and contacts that she had made during the week. And this is how they slowly spread the faith. Hyde seized every opportunity to teach. On the trains, railway stations, hotel lounges, dining rooms, cafes, in the street, everywhere he went. Both he and Clara possessed a dignity which attracted others to them. This dignity was born out of their love for the dedication to spread the message far and wide of Baha'u'llah throughout Australia and New Zealand. Hyde was courteous, sincere, his manner at all times kind and gentle. He was patient and radiated joy and love. He studied the writings, ordered Baha'i books. He prepared teaching campaigns meticulously, and he wrote ahead to newspapers and organisations that he could present to and visit and talk to. So he was a very well-organised salesman, not only in his milk products, but in spreading the Baha'i teachings. Clara was warm, loving, gentle, but a determined person who could relate to anybody of any age or circumstance. A truly amazing ability to talk unaffectedly and humanly with anybody. And there's a story once when they went into a cafe and or somewhere to eat, and within no time she had everybody gathered around her talking and sharing the faith with them. People were attracted to her. She had healing hands and did massage and often recommended medical treatment for people who were unwell and sick. They were a perfect teaching team. When someone asked the beloved guardian what was the best method of teaching, Shoghi Effendi said, follow the example of the Dunns. Hyde was visiting Lismore, which is a country town north of New South Wales, when he was talking to some of the people in the hotel where he was staying. We call them pubs here in Australia. That was where you got accommodation in those days. When you travelled, you stayed at the local pub. That's where you met people, you talked to people, you made contact. And so he was talking to a group of men one night in the pub and telling them about the Baha'i Faith, and they were rather sceptical as to what he was talking about. And they said, oh, we should invite Mr. Whitaker down. He was an optometrist who was staying at the same pub. And we should invite him down because I'm sure he's got lots of questions to ask Hyde. And so they did. And Oswald Whitaker came down and he heard what Hyde had to say about the Baha'i Faith. And then he asked a question. And he said, can you tell me what is love? And Hyde replied, what would your reply be? But this was Hyde's reply. The whole law and power of the great universe is formulated love in action. Well, Oswald Whitaker was very impressed. He asked more questions, he received more information on the faith, and he very, very soon became a Baha'i. And they remained friends until the end of their life. In fact, Oswald Whitaker passed away just shortly after Hyde passed away. This is a photograph. I think it's the only photograph we have of Oswald Whitaker. This is Effie Baker, the first female Baha'i in Australia. And many of you might have heard of her because she was the lady who spent 11 years in the Holy Land with Shoghi Effendi, and he gave her a very important mission to travel through Iran and visit many of the holy places, to take photographs. He supplied her with the best camera at the time, and she connected up with friends in Iran, and she traveled for more than 6 months, taking photographs of the holy places, often in very dangerous circumstances, as the Iranian friends would know. And a lot of those photographs are now in the Dawnbreakers, which we have today. You know, sometime after the arrival of the Dunns in Australia, Mother received a letter from a Baha'i friend asking if they could call her Mother and Father instead of Clara and Hyde. And she was okay with that. And she remembered a dream that she had one day, that one day she would be called Mother. But she decided that she should ask Shoghi Effendi if he felt that this was okay. So she wrote and she asked him his permission, and he said, yes, of course, you are as their parents. First local spiritual assembly was formed in Melbourne in 1923, followed by Adelaide and Sydney. You know, the following statistics are absolutely overwhelming. By July 23, Hyde Dunn had visited 225 towns, an average of one new town for each 4.5 days of work. Now, I don't know about you, but he didn't have a Mercedes-Benz. He travelled by bus and train in those days, and they didn't go so fast, and many of those roads were not beautiful highways that we have these days. But he certainly moved around, and he moved fast. And he wasn't young, he was well into his 60s. So he was definitely, absolutely dedicated to his task of not only selling Nestle, but of giving the message. And it wasn't easy. It was very hard. Not everybody wanted to hear the message. And they found that one of the most difficult things was when the local assemblies were formed, they stayed in that city for a while to nurture the friends and deepen them. But when they left, the local assembly collapsed. And it collapsed for a couple of reasons. Number one, because many of the friends that came into the faith at that time were old Baha'is like them in their age group, sometimes older. And some of them passed away. So then the local assembly went below 9. The other reason, of course, was because they just weren't spurred on without the Dunns there to nurture them through the activities of the local assembly. Hyde would write to Shoghi Effendi about every 3 months and give reports on their activities. And Shoghi Effendi was constantly writing back to them, encouraging them in every way. And this is a most beautiful letter that Hyde received back. Shoghi Effendi says, "What an encouragement and what an inspiration to be revived every now and then with a fresh breeze wafting from faraway Australia and laden with the perfume of your love and devotion of his sacred cause. 1,000 times well done." I'm sorry, I get emotional here because it's just so beautiful. You know, the strength that they had. 1,000 times well done, my dearly beloved ones. Your warmth, your perseverance, your confidence, your faith will, I'm certain, establish our precious cause in the very heart of that continent, which in future will ring with the greatest name and extol the glorious self-sacrificing labours of you, who are the pioneers of his cause in those faraway regions. Your reward will be unexpectedly great, and your efforts will be richly recompensed by Abdu'l-Baha himself in the world to come. Your true brother, Shoghi. Mother Dunn went on pilgrimage in 1932 to visit, of course, the holy places and to connect with Shoghi Effendi. Father could not go, he had to work. In fact, he worked until he was 78 because they didn't have a lot of money and he had to keep them. Years later, Mother told us that she really went to ask Shoghi Effendi to replace them as they felt that they had failed. And she often told us the story of how she was sitting with Shoghi Effendi with tears in her eyes and she begged of him to replace them with someone else. She said, I feel so awkward and clumsy, uneducated. I feel that someone else could do the work better than I. The beloved guardian looked at her, put his hand lovingly over hers, and looking deep into her eyes, he said, "Go back to Australia and form the National Spiritual Assembly. Remember, Peter the fisherman, he could neither read nor write and did not even know the days of the week." So Mother returned from pilgrimage, and it was in 1934 that the first National Spiritual Assembly of Australia and New Zealand was formed, based on 3 local spiritual assemblies, one in Auckland, one in Sydney, and one in Adelaide. That's where I come from. Melbourne had lapsed. Melbourne had lapsed, yes, and Perth in Western Australia had lapsed at that time. There were only about 70 Baha'is in the whole of Australia at that time. But the Dunns were absolutely delighted that the National Assembly was formed, because now it took a lot of pressure off of them. Now they knew that the Baha'i community would be guided by the National Spiritual Assembly in their workings. Of course, Mother and Father would continue on in their teaching endeavours, which they did, but the National Assembly was there to support them. Father Dunn is there. You will see him in the middle of the front. I'll show you a few photographs here that I have of some of the early Baha'is in those early days, and Dunn's first meeting place in Sydney, in the Randwick area. And then Mariette and Stanley Bolton, who became Baha'is in 1925, and they offered their property to the faith when they passed on, and that is where the Yerimble Summer School is held today, and many other activities, Baha'i activities, are held there at that beautiful country property. Hyde Dunn passed away on the 17th of February 1941. Now it was Mother's turn to take over the responsibilities that Hyde had given in talking to the friends and deepening them and so on. And when he passed away, Shoghi Effendi said, "The community of the most great name in these far-off islands have lost a great leader, a stalwart upholder of the New World Order of Baha'u'llah. The influence he has exercised will, however, continue to live, and the example he has set will inspire the rising generation to perform deeds as great and brilliant as those which will ever remain associated with his name. Our dear friend, Mr. Hyde Dunn, will from his exalted station intercede on your behalf, and you should on your part strive to emulate one whom Baha'i historians will recognise and acclaim as Australia's spiritual conqueror. I will pray for his dear spiritual children from the depths of my heart." Shoghi. In 1944, the first Hazrat al-Quds of Australia came into being. Shoghi Effendi himself contributed $1,000 for the purchase of this property, and many Baha'is around the world also contributed. My parents became Baha'is in 1944, and they had to be deepened. And in those days, you had to be deepened in the Will and Testament before the National Assembly would accept you, accept your registration. Mother Dunn visited us shortly afterwards and helped in firesides and deepening my parents in the faith. I was born in 1946, and my parents immediately involved themselves in the teaching work, held regular firesides with their neighbours, and when my father had a question that no one could answer, he wrote to Shoghi Effendi and received many replies. It was in 1948 that, just after teaching neighbours in our neighbourhood, that the first local spiritual assembly of Woodville was formed. This is outside of the city of Adelaide, one of the suburbs of Adelaide. And in this photograph, we see Mother Dunn addressing the friends on that occasion. And many of the National Spiritual Assembly members from different parts of Australia visited us at that time. It was a big occasion. The Mayor of Woodville attended and many dignitaries. So it was around this time that Mother Dunn started visiting our family many times, very often. And here we will now go into my recollection of Mother. Here's a photograph of us. I'm the little one. I was one of 5 children eventually. I have 3 sisters and 1 brother. Here's 2 of my other sisters in this photograph. I'm the youngest one. And then here I am sitting on the lap of Mother Dunn and my 2 sisters behind. Here's another photograph taken in 1952 when Mother was visiting us, and we were obviously doing a dress up. And there she is. I'm the youngest one here. Another one in 1954 where Mother is feeding my younger brother the bottle, and that's my mother sitting next to her. This is a very favourite photograph we have of Mother saying her prayer. She would always pray with her hands outstretched. And some of her favourite prayers were, "O Lord, my God, my haven in my distress." And another one was, oh God, this is a broken-winged bird," which may be familiar to many of the friends. And, "O thou incomparable God, O thou Lord of the kingdom, these souls are thy heavenly army." These were 3 of her favourite prayers. This is Mother taken in our garden in 1954. You remember I said to you that she stayed with us when my father took a tape recording of her, how she became a Baha'i and visited Abdu'l-Baha and then came to Australia. And this photograph was taken at this time in our front garden. And I want you to look carefully at her bag that she has hidden behind her shawl and her green and red shawl. And you can think a little bit as to why would Mother knit red and green shawls. And I will come back to you after the next photograph with a story about that. So just remember this photograph. This is a lovely photograph we have, which was taken at our Yerrimble Summer School of Christmas 57-58. And I'm the little girl there with the little book in my hand, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next to Mother Dunn is a gentleman that maybe some of you will recognise as Dr. Peter Khan, former House of Justice member. The 2 friends in the front row are the same as Mother. Mother Dunn is sitting there. The next lady is Elizabeth Heinsohn, and next to her is Mariette Bolton, and then Stanley Bolton Sr. They are the owners of Yerrimbul, that the Yerrimbul property, which was given to the faith. So we owe them our gratitude for handing it over to the faith. Okay, you remember the small book that I showed you? That was my autograph book. I started this autograph book in 1951. I was just five or 6 years of age. And one of the first people I got to sign my book, of course, was Mother Dunn. And here she wrote in it her hidden word: "In the garden of thy heart, plant naught but the rose of love." And that's a beautiful photograph I have put in there of Mother Dunn. When I was looking through this little book the other day, lots of beautiful autographs from some of those early believers in that time who became Knights of Baha'u'llah. Even Peter Khan, Dr. Peter Khan, he was just a youth at that time, wrote in my book. There's his autograph, Peter Khan. You'll see Peter Khan written on the bottom. That was 1950. Oh, that was 1957. He did that. And then other lovely autographs from other Baha'is. And you know, my sister gave her autograph book to Mother, and she wrote, my sister was 7 years older than me, and she wrote in her book, "Think more of the Lord and less of the boys," which gave a little bit of an idea of Mother's Irish wit. She loved to joke, and she loved to play pranks and tell funny stories. And this is what she wrote in my sister's autograph book. You know, when Mother stayed with us, or when I was growing up, my father was on the National Spiritual Assembly, and he would travel into Sydney for National Assembly members once a month. And he would fly to Sydney, because those of you who are overseas, Adelaide and Sydney were quite a distance. And he would go to the Hazrat al-Quds, and from 1952, Mother stayed at that Hazrat al-Quds. She sometimes travelled around to Melbourne, Adelaide and Brisbane, but her base was in Sydney at the Hazrat al-Quds. And he would see her when he went on his NSA meetings. And so I would send little gifts to Mother. She loved black jelly beans. So I would go to the corner shop and I would pick out all the black jelly beans. You know, they were little black jelly things. Put them in a little brown paper bag with a little bow or something around it, and ask my dad to give it to her. And then I would ask him to buy Cashmere Bouquet soap, which was a special soap. You know, in those days, we didn't have the varieties of soaps that we have these days. But she liked Cashmere Bouquet, and it's got quite a lovely fragrance. And so I would buy this out of my own pocket money and ask my dad to please give it to Mother. And she loved receiving these gifts. And she would often send gifts back to us. Once she sent me a handkerchief. And this is the handkerchief that I have. And once she gave me, you remember that green and red shawl? She knitted them and she gave them away, and she gave me one. She knitted them and often stayed at our house while she was knitting these shawls. And she would drop the stitches. And so she would ask me or my sisters to pick up the stitches. And sometimes, if you know how to do knitting, the stitches were quite far down and we'd have to go up until we got it back onto the needle. And she would ask everybody, why did she choose green and red? Well, green was for the lineage of the Bab, red for the martyrdom. So that's why Mother chose those colours. And she knitted many of them and gave them away. But I was very fortunate to receive one. She also gave me her Baha'i ring. But somebody needed it more than me. And when my house was broken into and my jewellery box stolen, they stole Mother Dunn's ring. So I hope they've looked after it, or they've had a good use of it, because I'm going to know when I get up there who took it. And they won't be very pleased with me, I assure you. You know, in 1953, my parents went on pilgrimage. This was after the Intercontinental Conference in New Delhi in India. Shoghi Effendi had called for a series of, I think it was 4 conferences at that time. One was in New Delhi in India. And both of my parents went. And because both of my parents went, we children at that time, we were 4, me and my 3 sisters. We went and stayed with various members of our family, and I went to stay with my aunt and uncle. And I received a letter from Mother Dunn, and I will read it to you because it's really quite special. This is a letter written in Mother's writing, and you will see in 1954, she's already 84 years of age, and she took the trouble to write to a small girl and give a message. And she says, "To my dear little Princess Mariette, with all my love, you must be a real princess for Abdu'l-Baha and the beloved guardian. Show all the other children how kind and loving you can be. And of all things, do all you can for Mummy and Daddy, who loves you so much." Sorry. Oh, at the back. Sorry for that. Love you so much and has done so much for you while they are away in India. Make them proud to hear all the kind things you have done for your auntie and uncle. With my dear love to you, lovingly, Mother Dunn. Such a sweet, you know, Mother wrote and wrote and wrote. And when she wrote to you, if you didn't reply to her, she would get back to you and say, "I haven't heard from you, dear. I know you must be busy looking after your family. I'm just sending you all my love." Because that's how they communicated in those days. You know, there was no emails and WhatsApp and inexpensive telephones. So the mode was to write letters, and everybody wrote letters. And we received a stack of letters from Mother. Another letter she wrote was to my sister Kay, my sister, the one that's 7 years older than me. And one day my sister said to me, "Mariette, do you remember receiving some chocolates from Mother?" And I said, "Oh, I can't remember." And she said, "Well, I just found the letter the other day where Mother explains what happened to the chocolates." So I said, "Oh, okay." So she sent me a copy. And this is what Mother says. This is a letter written in 1955 to my sister Kay. "Dear little Kay, and I don't think you are so very little. Thank you for your very sweet intercalary letter. It was so very kind of you to write one such a nice letter. Tell Mariette I had a nice box of chocolates for her and a handkerchief to send her by Daddy. But he came tearing down the stairs, thinking he would miss his plane, that he put everything out of my head. And now I will enclose the hanky, but the chocolates, I'm afraid, I ate them myself." So we had a good laugh. That's what happened to the chocolates. And the running down the stairs, you know, Two Lang Road was 2-story, and the bedrooms were upstairs. So obviously my father had come down from maybe one of the bedrooms upstairs, running down, and Mother's flat was just there. And she was going to give him something, and then, because he went tearing out, she forgot. So that's what happened. You know, there's a couple of other lovely stories I can tell you. When Mother wasn't well, when she was in Adelaide, and she was staying at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Bowes, and she was in a lovely big double bed with lovely big buffy pillows all around her, looking really very sweet. And the Baha'is gathered and said some prayers, and we were all sitting around in a circle saying prayers. And we said our prayers, and then somebody said, "Can you pass me a prayer book?" And Mother said, "You can't take a prayer book with you." So that was her advice for us. Another time when we were praying in a similar situation, and everybody had finished saying their prayers, Mother hadn't been well, and we thought, oh, you know, maybe she's so frail, maybe it won't be long and she'll pass on. So we said prayers for her health and so on. And then she looks up with one eye open like that, and she says, "I'm still here." So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about Mother's wit. Something else I'd like to share with you at this time while we've got this window open. You know, Father Dunn would receive copies of tablets from his Baha'i friends in the States. He would take quotations from books and so on, and he was always typing them out, copying them out, and handing them out to the friends. And in the end, he went blind, but even when he was 99% blind, he was still typing because he knew the keyboard on the typewriter. Mother would help him, but he was still type. And this is one of the copies of his typewritten quotations, which he would hand out to the friends. This is one of the, it's quite dilapidated now. It's one of the folders. This is how he used to do them up and put the copies like this and hand them out to the friends. And there was a stack of these. Many of them are now with the archives in Australia, but I just have a few. Oh, another story I can share with you, which is rather sweet. One day my father arrived for an NSA meeting, and he knocked at the door of the Hazard Courts. It was a very big, heavy door, and Mother Dunn answered the door. And she said, "Well, aren't you going to give me a kiss?" And he said, "Mother, you know that Shoghi Effendi told us that the men can't kiss the women." And she looked at him and she said, "He didn't say anything about grandmothers." So that was her wit. You know, they loved each other dearly, and they were very, very close, as you can imagine. Over the years, in their role, they became very, very close. So here's a lovely photograph with my mother on Mother's right, and Ethel Dorr, a very sweet, dedicated Baha'i there. And there Ethel Dorr is with Mother. She was like her companion when Mother went to New Delhi Conference in 1953. Here's Mother Dunn with some friends in Adelaide. Here she is again. Some of the Australian believers will know some of these friends. Mother Dunn with some of the friends. Kath Harkis, the lady, I don't know if this lady here, whether you can see it, this lady here. Kath Harkis was Mother's carer for quite some time. And this lady here, Lillian Wyss, became the Knight of Baha'u'llah to Samoa. In 1954, Shoghi Effendi called for the Hands of the Cause to appoint auxiliary board members. And Mother appointed my father and Thelma Perks. And you know, Thelma Perks was just such a beautiful soul. She financially supported Mother for 11 years before she became a Baha'i. They were great friends. And then eventually Thelma became a Baha'i and Mother appointed her auxiliary board member. Just a beautiful soul. You know, it was in 1957 that Shoghi Effendi appointed his last contingent of hands. That's when my father was appointed. And then, of course, as we all know, Shoghi Effendi passed away very soon afterwards. And in November, all of the Hands of the Cause met in Haifa. You know, Mother at this time was 87, 88. And I remember her staying with us at this time. Within 1 month, she had to have her vaccinations. She had to get a passport because she hadn't travelled outside of Australia since they had arrived, or since her pilgrimage, actually. And so all of these things had to be done, and she was elderly. She didn't even have any clothes that were suitable for travelling. So I remember that my mother went up to 2 major stores, Myer and David Jones, and brought back a suitcase of clothes, and Mother tried them on and decided which ones she wanted. And then my mother took the rest back and got credit on them. And so here we are here, wishing Clara a bon voyage on this trip. And the lady next to her on Mother's left-hand side, is Marjorie Bowes. She travelled as her companion. Of course, this is my father at the back. These 2 girls here are my sisters. I'm the small girl down here in the bottom. This is my younger brother and my other sister here. And these are other friends. Here's Dr. Peter Khan. Of course, just a young man at that time. In 1958, intercontinental conferences were held around the world, and Shoghi Effendi had already appointed his representatives to attend these conferences. And so Mason Reamy came to Australia as the Guardian's representative in 1958. We also had Agnes Alexander, and we also had Mr. Kardem. So together with Mother and my father, there were 5 Hands of the Cause here in Australia at that time. Also at that time was the laying of the foundation stone of the House of Worship in Sydney. And the beloved Guardian had asked Mother to place the sacred earth from the Castle of Marcoux in the foundation of the House of Worship, and this Mother did. course, in 1960, Mother passed away. And she was buried alongside Hyde Dunn at the Warrenora Cemetery, just south of the city of Sydney. And she's there with Hyde Dunn. And this is a beautiful quotation at the bottom of their what do you call that? Anyway, it says, "Whoso hath attained their presence will glory in their meeting, and all that dwell in every land will be illumined by their memory." And I think that's what we are doing tonight. We are remembering them. We are honouring them. Husband and wife, the only two husband and wife, hands of the cause, who opened up a continent to the faith, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, and who persevered through all their trials and tribulations. You know, one of the friends asked Mother, "Mother, would you tell us about your tests and difficulties?" She says, "What, dear?" She said, "Can you tell us about your tests and difficulties?" She says, "I didn't have any. We just carried on. We overcame. We didn't have any." So that's how Mother and Father looked at their tests and difficulties. A great example to us all. You know, when my father passed away in 1990 in Kathmandu, and Rahir Khanum wrote to my mother and said, "When I think of my colleagues, my fellow hands, who circled the globe in his service, I think how appropriate that their resting places too are scattered around the globe. Those spots are special points of attraction and stimulation to the efforts of the friends. Like precious sparkling gems, they are pinpoints of light across a darkened planet." So many of the hands didn't pass away in their home country. They passed away in foreign lands. And they are like sparkling gems that we can all visit. They're holy places, really, that we can visit and honour them. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I will now pass over to Sean. If there are any questions, and if any of you, I know it's exactly an hour and a half, I think. So I kept to my time pretty well. If any of you do have some questions, I'll be happy just to answer a few.
I could unmute myself. Well, thank you so much, Mariette. It was such a mesmerizing, enthralling, emotional, really got engaged with your talk. And I don't think anybody else could have given that talk apart from you. Don't you all agree? You know, so I've got, yeah, we will show appreciation by those who are on video. Exactly. Now I've got 4 questions for you, just only 4. And I've got one from Hovida. Do you know of a list of towns that Father and Mother Dunn visited?
Well, they visited 225 towns in 2 years.
Yeah, no.
Which town didn't they visit? Maybe might be a more appropriate question.
Exactly.
They travelled in Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Tasmania. So I'm not sure which towns they didn't visit.
Right.
And also in New Zealand.
Right, right, okay.
So I don't exactly have that answer.
Right. Well, a lot of towns, a lot of towns. A question from Chris Wade. Any information you may have regarding the Dunn's stay in Honolulu?
They were there for a couple of months. So no, off the top of my head, I don't. I think there is a little bit of information, but I would have to go back and check that up. Yes, I have read there a few stories of friends that they met and so on in Honolulu.
Yeah, we're going to check with maybe the Hawaiian Baha'is. A question from Katayun. Did they live in San Francisco or Santa Cruz, the Dunns, in California?
I'm not sure exactly. They might have moved around, you know.
Yeah, I think they moved around and they pioneered as well.
Yes, I mean, even in the United States, Father was moving around all the time because he was a salesman there. Oh. So he was not confined to one place. But I think, well, at the time when their holiday and at the time when they answered the tablets of the divine plan, they were in Santa Cruz. But I think they were in, well, they were in California somewhere. I'm not sure where.
Okay. And a question from Siva Perry. When did the Dunns leave their home to pioneer to Australia?
I don't know if I have that exact date.
It'll be sometime in 1920, wouldn't it? Because they arrived here on 10th of April or late 1920.
Yes, it would have been early 1920. Yes, they were sometime in Hawaii. So it was early 1920. The exact date, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, the sea voyage at those times would probably took about 3 months to come all the way here, wouldn't it?
They had to wait. They had to wait for the ship in Hawaii.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions. A lot of commendation. Thank you very much for such beautiful and touching story. Thank you so much. Thank you for your beautiful words and memories. Thank you, Mom. It was a beautiful, inspiring presentation. Did you visit Mount Gambier in southeast of South Australia?
Oh.
Did you visit Mount Gambier? I would have thought so, wouldn't it?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Such a big town, prominent town over there. Thank you for sharing your inspiring and beautiful presentation. Ferry and John Walker raised their hand. So does that mean they want to speak? Okay, John and Ferry, you're on.
Greetings. Thank you to Mariette for such a wonderful and inspiring presentation.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Mariette, yes.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that there are not very many people left now who have actually met Mother Dunn. And I'm one of those who has had that privilege. I met her in 1959 before I actually became a Baha'i at the Baha'i Summer School.
Oh.
And I was, at that time, I was waiting for my university to see whether I got into university. And my father and mother were separated, but my father came to Sydney and to pick me up, to take me to Mudgee, where he was living at that time. And we got out in the car outside the house, and then he said to me, look, I'm planning to go to the Baha'i Summer School. Would you like to come? And I said, well, look, Mum won't be very happy with that because my mother was quite against the faith. And he said, well, let's not tell her, shall we? And so anyway, I said, right, fine, I'd like to go to the Baha'i Summer School. And so I went down there, and on the very first day there, I met Mother Dunn. She was, I can clearly remember it in my mind's eye right now. She was in a type of, like a chair that was like a relaxing chair, and with blankets and things, and she was under a tree just opposite the assembly hall there, the Hyde Dunn hall. And anyway, she had never seen me in her life before, but for some reason or other, she knew my name was John Walker. And she said, "Ah, and here comes Johnny Walker's whiskey." And she was a very straightforward, she had a good sense of humor, and you know, she sort of made you feel welcome immediately. And so that was one of the first impressions that I had of Mother Dunn. She used to, when she was at Yerrinville, she used to stay in a little room underneath the tank stand. And you know, this, you know, you just can't imagine. I mean, people wouldn't go into Yerrinville today, have all sort of luxury accommodation, but here she lived in this room underneath the tank stand.
That's right. Yes.
And you know, I thought, you know, here is the hand of the cause of God living under a tank stand.
And she would have been 89 at that age, John.
That's right. That was in December, January 1959. I also met, of course, Madge and Collis Featherstone there too at that time. And Peter Kahn as well, he gave a talk on the Book of Certitude. And it was really that talk that convinced me that I should become a Baha'i. Well, not the talk, but afterwards I read the Book of Certitude, and that convinced me.
Mm.
But I also met her on several other occasions because my uncle Noel was looking after. He was living in Tulang Road, the National Hazrat al-Quds that Mariette referred to, and which she showed you a picture of. And Mother Dunn lived there. She was living there in a little flat just near the entrance door. As you came in the entrance, that's where she was. And I can clearly remember her, you know, that picture you had of her in the bed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Praying.
All that was taken there.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was a very vivid memory.
And you know, I have a lovely story that Peter Kahn told us. He said that, you know, because she had good humour and Peter had good humour too. One night Peter was there for the 19-day feast and Mother didn't attend. She wasn't feeling well. And so he went into her flat afterwards to see her. And he said to her, "You know, Mother, you didn't attend the feast tonight." She said, "No, I wasn't well enough." He said, "Well, you know you're going to lose your voting rights, don't you?" And she said, "What? What are you telling me?" So that's how they used to tease one another.
Actually, every time she saw me, she used to always say, "Ah, and here comes Johnny Walker's whiskey." So in the end, I said to her, look, Mother Dunn, you know, we have some things in common, but some things are not the same. I said, first of all, I'm full of spirit, but I'm not as square as he is.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, she really liked that retort.
Yes. Mother loved a joke. She really did.
Well, thank you, John, for your reminiscences. Okay, I've got a question here from Jimmy. Jimmy Seow, what did the Dunns say about the character, about the Australian character when they came and the receptivity that they met?
They found it very difficult. They found that generally the people were not spiritual at all.
Mm.
That they didn't want to talk about spiritual things.
Mm.
And in fact, Father Dunn had said that he found that Sydney was the hardest place out of all of the cities.
Mm.
So it was not easy for them to teach the faith. People didn't want to listen.
So would you say it's easier now than compared to that time?
Oh, how can I say?
Some multiculturalism may have made the Australian character more receptive.
Hopefully.
I have another question here from Martine. Thank you, dear Mariette, for your heartfelt and fascinating presentation. Which aspects of Mother's life, qualities and characteristics can we apply to our efforts today?
You know, both mother and father were absolutely methodical. They were detached. They were detached from everything. And, you know, as I mentioned in my talk, father planned. They planned meticulously their teaching activities, their campaigns. That, you know, who was he going to visit? Which church was here? Which organisation was there that he could talk to? You know, they constantly contacted all these different organisations and places where they could give talks and invite people. And, you know, in those days, I guess that's how people learned about information. You know, when you visited a country town and you were a salesman, you were news in the newspaper. So it was very easy for him in that respect to get an advertisement in the newspaper because he was there to sell Nestle, okay? But he would take advantage of that and mention the faith as well. He would go to all the chemists, all the doctors, all the medical centres around every city, because that's where he wanted to sell Nestle. But this also gave him the opportunity to mention the faith. And then he would, once he went into a pharmacy, a chemist shop, and he tried to talk to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist said, oh, I'm too busy. So he went out onto the footpath and he thought about it, and he thought, I can't not tell him about the faith. So he waited very patiently outside the shop until there were no customers. And then he went back in and he said, I would just like to be your friend. And that started a conversation, and they ended up being friends for many years. So he persevered, you know, he didn't give up on anybody.
Yeah, being systematic is what a house is telling us now. Be systematic and focus. Okay, well, are there any other questions? Because I don't seem to see any more. But otherwise, everyone is very appreciative, Mariette, of what you've done. And really, you know,
My pleasure.
Such a touching presentation because of your intimate knowledge, you know, and your closeness with them. Nobody else can really give this talk. So if there are no other questions, okay. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much for past almost 2 hours now. And if you want to listen to it again, come to our next presentation. If you have more questions, you thought of, come to our next presentation and be prepared to ask Mariette the questions. So thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good night.